The chandeliers sparkled like constellations, scattering light across the polished marble floor of the grand ballroom. Guests in glittering gowns and crisp suits mingled, laughter and the clink of glasses filling the air. I stood near the edge of the room, my hands trembling slightly as I adjusted the delicate bracelet on my wrist. Today was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life, my engagement. The man I loved, my fiancé, was standing across the room, smiling at me in that way that made everything else fade into background noise. But as my father approached with a glass of champagne in hand, my heart twisted into a knot. He smiled, but his eyes held that sharp, calculating glint I had learned to dread. Dad had always been a man of pride and words sharper than knives, and tonight, it seemed, he was ready to prove it. The guests had begun to gather around the small platform for the traditional toasts. I tried to steady my breath, to tell myself it would be fine, that perhaps he would say something kind. Maybe he would finally acknowledge all the late nights, the struggles, the sacrifices I had made to become the woman I was today. He raised his glass and silence fell. The chatter in the room stilled, all eyes turning toward him. "I'd like to say a few words," he began, his voice smooth, confident, "about my daughter." I forced a smile, my stomach tightening. "She's well," he paused, looking around at the assembled friends and family. "She's not exactly what most men would want." The words hit me like ice. My mouth went dry, and for a heartbeat I felt invisible, reduced to nothing more than the object of a cruel joke. The polite laughter that followed felt jagged, slicing into me rather than comforting me. My fiancé's smile faltered, confusion and anger flickering across his face. I wanted to disappear. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole. The entire room was watching, and I could feel the weight of every judgmental gaze, every whisper that had yet to be spoken. My father continued, oblivious, or perhaps deliberate, in his cruelty, recounting anecdotes that painted me as clumsy, unworthy, or somehow lacking. Each word burrowed into me like a tiny, relentless dagger. I had always known he could be cruel, but I had never expected him to humiliate me like this, on the night that was supposed to celebrate love, commitment, and family. I could feel my hands tightening into fists at my sides, my nails digging into my palms to anchor myself against the rising tide of tears. Finally, he raised his glass again, a smug sort of pride etched into his expression. "To my daughter, may she find someone who actually wants her." A polite chuckle rippled through the room, but I barely heard it. I heard only the thudding of my own heart, the sharp sting of betrayal, and the bitter taste of shame coating my tongue. My fiancé stepped closer, his hand brushing against mine, a silent gesture of support. I wanted to lean into him, to melt into his arms, but I couldn't. Not yet, not with my father standing there, victorious in his cruelty. I left the toast feeling hollow, the smiles around me feeling fake, superficial. Everyone else seemed to move on, laughing at jokes and posing for pictures, but I felt trapped in a bubble of humiliation that no one could penetrate. That night, the engagement celebration went on, but for me, it had ended the moment my father's words cut through the room. I went to the edge of the terrace overlooking the city, needing air, needing space to breathe. The lights of the skyline shimmered in the night, beautiful and indifferent. And as I clutched the railing, staring at the glittering world below, a quiet voice inside me began to whisper, not of despair, but of resolve. He had humiliated me, he had underestimated me, and he had no idea what I was capable of. The night after the engagement, the house was silent, eerily so. The echoes of my father's words still reverberated through my mind, each syllable a bitter reminder of the humiliation I had endured. I couldn't sleep, couldn't shake the image of his smug face, the polite laughter of the guests, the way my fiancé had looked at me with a mixture of shock and helplessness. I retreated to my room, shutting the door behind me. The soft glow of the bedside lamp painted the walls in warm hues, but it did nothing to soften the cold knot that had settled in my chest. I sat on the edge of my bed, hugging my knees, replaying every moment of the toast in my head. Every word he had spoken, every inflection, every smirk, it all churned inside me, an unrelenting storm of shame, anger, and disbelief. And then, as if guided by some hidden instinct, my eyes fell on the small box I had tucked away months ago, forgotten in the whirlwind of wedding planning. It was my father's old study key, one of those brass skeleton keys that looked ordinary but had always fascinated me. I remembered the lock it opened the bottom drawer of his antique desk, the one he always said was off limits. Something about the humiliation of the past 24 hours made me want to see what he was hiding. I tiptoed down the hall, careful not to wake anyone. The house felt different at night, quieter, almost conspiratorial. The study door loomed ahead, dark and imposing. My hand trembled as I inserted the key into the lock. It clicked open, a sound that echoed like opportunity in the stillness. Inside, the desk drawer was cluttered with papers, old files, and envelopes tied with red string. At first glance, it seemed like mundane clutter: bills, receipts, mundane correspondence. But then I saw it. A folder marked in his neat, precise handwriting, labeled the truth about everything. My heart raced as I pulled it out, the weight of what I might find pressing against my chest. Inside were documents that revealed a side of my father I had never known. Financial records showing mismanaged funds, investments gone wrong, debts hidden from the family, letters detailing betrayals to business partners, legal maneuvers designed to protect himself at others' expense. And then at the bottom, personal letters he had written but never sent, confessions of lies, manipulations, and cover-ups that painted him as less the stern patriarch and more a man driven by ego and fear. I sank to the floor, the folder clutched against my chest, feeling a mix of disbelief and vindication. The man who had publicly humiliated me, who had tried to make me feel worthless on my engagement day, was flawed, exposed in a way I never could have imagined. And in that revelation, a spark ignited inside me. This wasn't just about embarrassment anymore. It wasn't just about words spoken in a room full of people. This was about justice, about reclaiming my dignity, about showing him that underestimating me had been his gravest mistake. For the first time since the engagement, I felt a strange sense of calm. The storm of humiliation that had kept me awake all night began to settle, replaced by a sharp clarity. I could do something. I could turn the tables. And I would, not recklessly, not cruelly, but with precision, with strategy, with a patience that would make every word he had spoken that night feel like a distant echo of his own failure. I closed the folder, tucking it carefully into my bag. The night outside was still, the city lights sparkling like promises. I stepped back into the hallway, my resolve solidifying with each quiet breath. He had thought he had power over me. He had thought his words could break me. He was wrong, and soon he would see just how wrong he had been. The weeks after my discovery passed in a blur of quiet planning. By day, I was the same polite, composed daughter everyone thought they knew. I laughed at family dinners, offered help in organizing events, and even smiled at my father in that way that made him think his words had left no mark. But beneath the surface, a different current ran through me, a cold, deliberate focus. Every word he had spoken at my engagement, every smirk, every public humiliation, had been stored like ammunition. I started small, subtle things that seemed almost coincidental. I contacted a few of my father's business associates under the guise of friendly curiosity, asking innocuous questions that, at first glance, seemed harmless. But each conversation was a probe, a careful assessment of where his weaknesses lay. I discovered contracts he had manipulated, minor betrayals he had tried to hide, and financial irregularities that, if brought to light, could tarnish his carefully curated reputation. It was intoxicating to see the pieces fall into place. I wasn't doing this out of cruelty. I wasn't trying to destroy him. I was correcting a balance, reclaiming the dignity he had tried to strip from me in front of everyone I cared about. It felt poetic, like a symphony where every note struck at the exact moment it should. The first act of my subtle revenge came at a family charity event. My father, ever the showman, was giving a speech about integrity and leadership, his voice smooth, his smile confident. I knew that many of the guests respected him, saw him as infallible, but I had prepared. With the help of a discreet friend in the finance world, I had obtained documents showing one of his successful ventures had actually been mismanaged, causing substantial losses to charitable funds. As he spoke, I waited, heart steady, pulse calm. At the end of his speech, I casually handed a copy of the documents to the event organizer, suggesting they might want to review the records for transparency. The room shifted, murmurs spread, polite confusion turning to concern, and I watched my father's confident smile falter ever so slightly. The sting of that faltering, the tiny crack in his armor, was electric. I didn't celebrate, I merely observed, letting him wrestle with the consequences of the secrets he had buried for so long. Over the next few weeks, I orchestrated smaller, clever moves that targeted his pride rather than his life. A whispered conversation with a longtime friend about his hidden debts, a discreet tip to a journalist about his mismanaged business deals. Each action was measured, precise, leaving no trace back to me, but each one mirrored the embarrassment he had inflicted upon me. And through it all, I grew stronger. My fiancé watched me transform, awe and admiration in his eyes. He never asked for details, never questioned my methods. He simply held my hand when my father's shadow loomed too close, reminding me that I wasn't alone. The sweetest moment came quietly, unexpectedly. My father, once so sharp, so domineering, began to falter publicly, not in the scandalous sense, but in the slow erosion of his authority, the subtle shifts in the way people treated him. Invitations that once arrived promptly were delayed. Compliments that once came freely were cautious. And through it all, he didn't know why. He couldn't trace the shift. He only sensed that his control, his power was slipping, and that feeling, that helpless uncertainty, was the exact reflection of what he had made me feel. I had not shouted my triumph, nor gloatingly revealed my hand. I had merely shown him that underestimating me had been his gravest error. Every step I had taken, every carefully placed move, was both shield and sword, a way to reclaim myself without stooping to cruelty. And as I watched him struggle with the invisible consequences of his own actions, I felt a calm satisfaction settle deep in my chest. This was justice, not revenge born of bitterness. This was balance restored. He had thought he could break me. He had thought his words could define me. He had been wrong. And I was finally free. The morning sunlight spilled across the living room, soft and golden, but it couldn't warm the tension that had settled over the house. My father sat in his favorite leather chair, fingers drumming restlessly on the armrest, a storm of frustration hidden behind the mask of composure he had worn for decades. I watched him quietly from the doorway, my presence barely acknowledged, though he could feel it like a weight pressing against his chest. He didn't know I was there, because I had never revealed my role. Every subtle shift in his fortune, every questioning glance from associates, every whispered rumor. He believed it was coincidence, luck, or perhaps the misjudgment of others. But I knew the truth. Every carefully laid plan, every strategic move had been mine. The humiliation he had inflicted on my engagement night had set in motion a quiet reckoning, and now he was living it. I stepped forward, letting the soft click of my heels announce my arrival. He looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes, but quickly masked it with a practiced smile. "Morning," he said cautiously, his tone almost neutral. "Morning, Dad," I replied, my voice calm, steady, controlled. I approached the window, looking out at the city below, letting the silence stretch between us. It was deliberate, my small act of dominance. The quiet spoke louder than words. For the first time, I saw him truly unsettled. His usual arrogance was tempered by uncertainty. He shifted in his chair, avoiding my gaze, as if the presence of the daughter he had tried to humiliate carried an invisible weight he could not bear. "I've been thinking," I began softly, almost conversational, about family, integrity, and honesty. I let the words hang, their meaning clear even without elaboration. He swallowed, unease creeping into his features. I don't understand what you mean," he muttered, but the crack in his voice betrayed him. I smiled faintly, not cruelly, but with the satisfaction of someone who had endured and outlasted. "You thought your words could define me," I said. You thought that what you said at my engagement could make me small, ashamed, invisible, but words have power only if we let them, and I didn't. He shifted again, glancing nervously toward the stack of papers I had left subtly in the living room weeks before. The evidence, carefully arranged but never traced back to me, had begun to ripple through his world: financial disclosures, discreet inquiries from business associates, whispers that spread like quiet wildfire. He hadn't known how it was happening, but he could feel the impact. You've, he began, but stopped, realizing that whatever accusation he intended to voice could not reach me. The truth hung between us, a quiet triumph that needed no declaration. I took a slow breath, the calm after months of planning settling over me. "I'm not here to gloat," I said. "I'm here to let you see that power is not about fear, intimidation, or cruel words. It's about patience, intelligence, and the ability to act when the time is right. And you underestimated me." He looked down, shame flickering across his face. For once, he had no clever words, no arrogance to hide behind. The man who had tried to break me now sat confronted by the very balance he had denied me. I turned away, walking toward the door, feeling the weight of years of humiliation finally lift from my shoulders. Freedom was a quiet thing, not loud, not flashy, simply the ability to stand tall, unshaken whole. "You'll learn from this," I said over my shoulder. "Not because I destroyed you, but because life has a way of teaching lessons more subtle than words, and sometimes the lessons that sting the most are the ones we never see coming." He said nothing. I didn't need him to. My calm, my success, my strength spoke louder than any accusation or apology could. The reckoning had been served, not with rage, but with quiet, undeniable truth. As I stepped into the sunlight outside, I felt it at last, the weight lifted, the shame gone, replaced with something far more powerful: clarity, self-respect, and the knowledge that I was unstoppable. He had thought he had power over me. He had been wrong, and I was finally free.